Oxygen keeps us alive, but did you know it can also kill you? In this video, I'll break down what every scuba diver needs to know about oxygen and its risks. As a diver and instructor, I have watched videos, read articles, read books so that I can become a better diver and teach this to my students and share it now with you. Let's get into it. What decides whether you live or die is something called the partial pressure of oxygen, or PO2. What is that? Simply put, PO2 is the amount of oxygen in a container under pressure, like when you're scuba diving. When you're breathing a gas with oxygen in it, the higher the PO2, the more oxygen your body absorbs. So at some point, the amount of oxygen and the exposure to it becomes a problem. Later in the video, I'll explain exactly what dangerous levels of oxygen can do to you, but before that, let's dig a little bit into some history. During World War II, Dr. John Haldane and Dr. Helen Spurway were conducting experiments to test the effects of breathing gases under pressure, and specifically oxygen. This was done with the purpose to see how Navy divers are affected breathing gases, and specifically to find also ways how submarine personnel could escape in case of an emergency. So what did they find out? Here's one experiment they performed. Dr. Haldane and Dr. Spurway sat in a hyperbaric chamber. It was pressurized down to 27 meters under sea level, or about 90 feet. Dr. Helen Spurway took a chest-mounted rebreather and breathed from it for 33 minutes. It had 100% oxygen. After 33 minutes, she started vomiting, and also she reported that before that she experienced dizziness and flashing lights. After breathing just air from the chamber, she recovered very quickly. So what happened? Because of something called central nervous system, or CNS, oxygen toxicity. Remember how earlier I said that too much or too little oxygen is a problem? There's actually two parts to this. First one is the amount of PO2 of the gas you breathe. To calculate PO2, we have this nifty little formula. Do people still say nifty? Called Dalton's diamond, or the T formula. This formula allows us to calculate three things. Let's focus on the upper part first. This is how we calculate the partial pressure of oxygen. We take the oxygen percentage in the gas mix and multiply it by the atmospheric pressure. If this is confusing, don't worry, I'll explain what each part means in a second. Normally, what you and I breathe is air, which has 21% oxygen. And unless you're watching this high in the mountains or in a commercial dive bell somewhere at the bottom of the sea, the atmospheric pressure of air that we breathe is 1. And this is important to understand. Atmospheric pressure increases by 1 every 10 meters, or about 33 feet. So at surface level, the atmospheric pressure is 1. At 10 meters, it's going to be 2. And at 25 meters, it's going to be 3.5. Okay, so at sea level, the PO2 is then 0.21. As you descend deeper, the atmospheric pressure increases, and therefore the PO2 increases. The accepted safe upper limit for humans is believed to be 1.6. Past that, you're playing Russian roulette. What do you think was the PO2 for the scientist mentioned earlier? 3.7, or more than double the safe limit. I was shocked when I learned this, because when I learned scuba diving, I was taught that anything above 1.6 PO2 and you will start convulsing and drown and die. So is this limit a lie? Well, not really. The experiment took place in dry conditions. Later, the same scientists actually tested out the PO2 effects underwater, and they found out that indeed 1.6 PO2 is about the safe limit for most humans. DAN, or Divers Alert Network, did a similar study and found out a similar effect. So 1.6 was set as the safe upper limit for majority. In other words, immersion in water somehow lowers your oxygen tolerance. Why? Nobody really knows. Even today, the reason why wet exposure is much more dangerous than dry exposure is unknown. So then, is 1.6 an absolute limit for everyone? Well, no. In fact, in the early days, various military powers like the US Navy and Italian Navy used PO2 levels well above 2. The US Navy, for example, used 2.5, Italian Navy 2.2, and even nowadays, sometimes they can exceed those. That was done because, the mission was the priority, not really the safety of the divers. These days, a limit of 1.6 is generally accepted as safe. This is now taught universally by all diving agencies. Remember the Dalton's diamond from earlier? Because of PO2, every gas we breathe has a maximum operating depth, or MOD. The MOD is set based on the maximum PO2 that the person is willing to accept. And this might seem controversial. How come I'm saying that the PO2 levels are really personal? First of all, there is no scuba police, right? You can go dive to dangerous depths with improper gas mixes and nobody can really stop you. Second, because the chosen PO2 level really depends on the dive profile. So you need to understand whether you're planning on exerting yourself. The higher the exertion, the more it makes sense to be conservative with your PO2 levels. Whether you are simply more conservative, your personal preferences are more towards the safe side. Oftentimes the maximum operating depths are actually set based on this maximum PO2 of 1.6. So when diving on air with a PO2 of 1.6, the maximum operating depth is set to 66 meters or about 216 feet. You can actually see MOD markings on cylinders for more technical dives or dives with enriched air nitrox, so with gases that have above 21% oxygen in them. The dangers of high PO2 were actually known already since at least mid-20th century. Ironically, until 1990s, until mixed gas diving was becoming the norm, deep air diving was actually very common. One example was February 1990 by Brett Gilliam, former vice president of diving operations at Ocean Quest International, who set a world record by diving on air down to 137 meters or 452 feet, surpassing the previous record by 5 meters or about 15 feet. Let me know in the comments what was the PO2 for those dives. Okay, so if I won't exceed a PO2 of 1.6, I am safe, right? Again, not quite. See, earlier I mentioned that there's actually two parts to understanding the dangers of oxygen exposure. And the second part is a concept called oxygen clock. Essentially, it means there's only so much oxygen that your body can take. Once you become saturated enough with oxygen, you might start experiencing these lovely symptoms. This is called hyperoxia. You might remember seeing tables with the total exposure time safe for humans per a single dive and per a 24-hour range. These tables usually are coming from NOAA or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. This is especially relevant when you do repeat dives. Let's say you're a scientist or a photographer, or you simply want to do multiple dives per day and you want to stay down at the bottom as long as you can. So you need to take into account then the exposure times per single dive and per 24 hours, and you might need to limit either the bottom time or the depth at which you are, or simply the amount of dives that you do. So the concept of oxygen clock also tells us something interesting. It's not only about the PO2 of the gas that you breathe, it's also how long you breathe it. Some people believe that they can actually catch the onset of hyperoxia symptoms, but that's actually proven to be wrong, and symptoms vary from person to person. You don't want to find out which symptoms you will experience underwater. If you can go too high with PO2, can you go too low with it? Yes, absolutely. Easiest example to imagine are people going high in the mountains and then feeling oxygen deprived, with oxygen masks. This is called hypoxia, or a lack of oxygen for the body to function normally. Usually that occurs when the amount of PO2 in the gas that you breathe is below 0.16. This might surprise you, but in scuba diving we actually do breathe successfully gas mixes with a oxygen percentage below that of air, so below 21%. A common example is a trimix gas, of 1845 or 18% oxygen and 45% helium. Because if we calculate the PO2, it actually works pretty well. For example, this 1845 mix at 18% oxygen at, let's say, 70 meters of depth, the PO2 is way above the minimum of 0.16. One extreme example is actually Dr. Richard Harris, who dove to 230 meters or 754 feet on his rebreather with a gas mix that had oxygen less than 4%. He needed that because his mix also contained hydrogen, and you can imagine what are the potential risks of adding hydrogen to your gas mix. Look it up. As my cave diving instructor says, so, can oxygen kill you? By now you know the answer. Yes. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about high and low PO2s, hypoxia, hyperoxia, maximum operating depths, oxygen clock, oxygen toxicity, among many things. If oxygen toxicity hits underwater, you may lose consciousness and drown, often with no warning. Same if you don't have enough oxygen. That's why I believe that understanding PO2 and oxygen effects on the body is one of the most important concepts that a scuba diver needs to know, because you don't want to become another statistic. Thank you so much for taking the time and hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. And I agree, this video is not exhaustive. A lot more can be added or clarified and nuanced. So please, if you see anything that I made a mistake about, or just want to add some extra interesting information, please let us know in the comments. We're all here to learn and have fun together. If you like the content, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. This really helps me out. And until I see you next time, have a great rest of the day. Not understanding or following procedures leads to people dying. Czech actually knew that better than most, and he decided to do something about it. Click here to learn what he actually did.